Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. I feel like I should have a more official welcome in this video because I'm making consistent videos again after large interruptions in August, and I have a bunch of new subscribers from various places over the past month. So hello, welcome, thank you for subscribing. I mainly talk about science fiction and fantasy, and I usually do a better job at doing weekly wrap-ups. So this is me trying to get back into my usual routine. So today, in this video, I'm going to talk about the batch of books that I read in the week before I went to Worldcon, and then I will catch up with some other things in other wrap-ups to follow. If I manage to sit here for long enough to film all of them, I might get sleepy and go back to bed, because who knows? The lighting is a bit weird today because thunderstorms are rolling in and I have to use artificial light. It's very cozy, and that's part of why I kind of want to go back to bed. Anyway, let's dive into it. The first thing that I want to talk about is Bring Back the King by Helen Pilcher. If I remember correctly, the subtitle of this book is The New Science of De-extinction. I previously read one book on de-extinction, which I think was How to Clone a Mammoth by Beth Shapiro. I read it a couple of years ago. I was unimpressed at the time. So I've kind of been keeping my eye out for another book on the topic, and then this one presented itself. And I liked it, it was good, but it suffers from some of these same problems as another book that I read about a month ago, which was Built on Bones by Brenna Hassett. Both of these books, Bring Back the King and Built on Bones, are from the same popular science publishing line called Bloomsbury Sigma. And they're basically popular science discussion with a lot of humor and footnotes thrown in. I guess this is maybe the formula of this line. It's not really working for me. I had a lot of problems with Built on Bones because, one, I didn't think it was written very strongly, and then it went way overboard with the very irritating and distracting footnotes and jokes and stuff. Bring Back the King is actually better. It's toned down more. I think it's actually written better. Pilcher has background experience that really helps here. She's actually worked in a lab, she's kind of been a scientist, and she's been a journalist. And so when she's just talking about the science and just explaining things, the book really excels in those places. She's also been a stand-up comedian, and yes, there are jokes and there are footnotes, and it felt forced to me. Maybe it's kind of a cultural barrier. The author is English, I am American, but mainly it came across like authors in this series have like a contractual obligation to make a certain number of dumb jokes per chapter, and it's not working well for me. Anyway, that's like my major gripe of this book, is just too much forced humor, too many inane jokes. And I would recommend people read it if you're interested on the topic of de-extinction, but skip the chapter on Elvis. It's just stupid, don't bother. So what I did like about this, I find the idea of de-extinction quite interesting, and the fact is it intersects with genetics, which is an area I get very excited about. And so this book is really explanations of the various techniques and methodologies that have been proposed to bring back extinct species or give a boost to critically endangered species that are still around. So it's kind of like little case studies on projects like working to bring a mammoth back, or dodos, or Elvis, that sort of thing. And that's interesting to see the different types of techniques. This is also quite up to date. For example, CRISPR-Cas9 is mentioned and talked about, which I really enjoy. That's quite a cutting edge thing right now for gene editing. So like as an overview of de-extinction and some of the projects and some of the difficulties that we're still trying to overcome, this was really good and fun to read. The thing that I've noticed now after I've read all of 2 books about this topic is that authors and scientists kind of leave the ethical, moral dilemmas last, almost as like a postscript or an epilogue. Kind of like in this book, it's all, wouldn't it be so cool if we could do all of these things here, all the different ways we could clone animals and stuff, and then, oh yeah, well, at the very end we're gonna say, probably not going to happen because we still have to think through a lot of logistical details, and should we even do this in the first place? And I think that that discussion is the one that should actually be in the forefront rather than in the background. Like, that should be the bulk of the book rather than the sexy science and technology. I mean, I know that the sexy science and technology is what probably sells the books, but if you're actually having a serious conversation about whether de-extinction should happen, will happen, and when it will happen, it seems in my mind that the real obstacle isn't the technique itself. I have faith we're gonna figure out the actual steps to do this. It just takes time. The real obstacle is the should we even do this in the first place question. It's the what if you brought them back and you don't have a habitat to put these animals in? Those sorts of questions. That should really be wrestled with a bit more, and it's a good thought process to go through. And that's what I would love to know more about, rather than going over again and again how cloning works. I want to know what more scientists and people who work on these projects actually think about what they're going to do if they succeed. Like, that's the big question, isn't it? So it was a very interesting book on a very interesting topic, and if you're okay with the humor aspect, you will probably enjoy it. Next is a very interesting graphic novel called The Mythology Class by Arnold Arre. I wish I could remember where I found out about this graphic novel, but I didn't make a note of it, so if you know, let me know. So this was originally self-published in 4 parts by Arnold Arre back in the late 1990s in the Philippines. He is kind of a self-taught comic artist and did it all on his own, which I find very impressive. So the version that I read is a big omnibus, which has been revised in some ways. I don't know if it's even in print anymore, but if you're in the United States, Library of Congress has a copy, and that's where I ended up getting my interlibrary loan from. And it was really worth eventually tracking down because it's a really original story. The story is about a group of mostly unrelated young people in the Philippines who are recruited by mythical, legendary figures from Filipino folklore to be trained as warriors and help to track down and capture what are called encantos. Think of them kind of like demons that actually come from another world and need to be returned there. They cause a lot of trouble in our world. So this does happen. These young people do train, they have the adventure of their lives, and just as they think it's going to wrap up and they can get back to ordinary life, turns out there's some really awful demonic beasts being unleashed on the world and they have to save the world. And I really enjoyed that. The fact that the story is really all about Filipino folklore, which I didn't know anything about beforehand, that it's set in this part of the world, it had this completely different feel and flavor to it, and it was a really well told story. The only downside of this graphic novel for me was that I didn't like the artwork. It's just a style that really repulses me. I don't like the way that like people are drawn or their faces are drawn and stuff. And I think that's just Arre's style, and I just didn't personally like it that much. And in terms of this being a kind of self-made graphic novel and the artist and writer being self-taught, it was really well done. The only things that I would critique a bit probably were some of the page layouts. This is a very wordy story. There's a lot of narration and there's a lot of dialogue. So that combined with the style of the art itself made a lot of the pages feel very cramped and tight. But despite that, I just have to come back to the fact that this was a really good story with great characters, that it has a huge cast of characters. They all felt very distinct and like real people. And I would love to read more things like this. I'm not sure that I will seek out more things by Arnold R, says I really don't like his art style, but I would really love to find more comics and graphic novels like this which are published outside of the United States, because that would be very different. Next up, I read China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan, which is the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians. I read that a couple weeks ago and it was so fun. It was fluffy, extravagant, melodramatic romance with super, super rich people throwing gobs of money around. It was so fun. And China Rich Girlfriend was more of the same. I didn't like it as much as the first book, probably because the focus has shifted a bit off of Nick and Rachel and onto other couples and other side stories, but at its core it does remain extremely fun, and I can't wait to get to the third book. I also want to see the movie version of Crazy Rich Asians. We'll see if I take myself to the movie theater alone or not, because I don't have anybody here with me right now living in my city who probably wants to see it with me, but yeah, I really want to see it. And lastly for this video, I have Before Mars by Newman. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year, and I did really enjoy it. It was a really good story, but I also feel torn in very different directions about some elements in it. I have a very complicated emotional reaction to the main character and the themes of the book. So I decided to try to film a separate review of this to give myself more space to talk about it, so that is forthcoming. I did it without any notes, without any preparation beforehand, so if it's incoherent, well, that's easy to explain. I filmed it at 9 in the morning on Sunday, so we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, ultimately it was very good, but I feel complicated things about it. So that is it for this wrap up. If you have read any of these books and you want to talk to me about them, leave me some comments down below, and I'll be back very soon with my next wrap up. Not sure which one it will be, but it will be a wrap up. And until then, bye.